Thank you for joining us for continuation of the Bit Superstars event. Today, our guest speaker is Dr. Charlotte Beard. She's a clinical psychologist who innovates at the intersection of psychology and technology. She has over 20 international publications focusing on digital mental health, including risk and resilient factors related to internet gaming. Dr. Beard is a community leader of science and ethics for therapists in tech, an organization of over 750 mental health professionals dedicated to revolutionizing the digital mental health space. Dr. Beer is also the founder of OpenWorld, an organization that provides services to promote digital wellness, balance, and healthy gaming with cutting-edge evidence-based treatment. She is also a clinical psychologist with Kaiser Permanente. Charlotte Beard is a two-time graduate of PAU from both the MS in psychology and PhD in clinical psychology program. She's an adjunct faculty member in PAU's master's program. And again, thank you all for joining us today. And again, thank you, Dr. Beer, for being here. I'm going to pass it to Dr. O'Connor.
And actually updated to being visiting professor at Palo Alto University this quarter. So we're delighted to have you back joining us, Charlotte, for this event, but also the benefit you're giving to our students by bringing your passion for research methods to them. So
my pleasure.
We'll talk a little bit about that in just a bit. So let's start off with sort of telling us a little bit about your career trajectory and kind of where you landed. I know, like, what were the career steps on your path? So you decided to come to get your PhD, decided to get your master's and your PhD in clinical psych. You were thinking clinician, you were thinking a certain way, you shifted and sort of you moved in some ways. So I think it's really interesting and helpful to kind of look at the steps along that career trajectory. So give us your little journey so we have some background.
Of course. Well, first to start to say thanks so much for having me here. I have been so delighted to see the growth of the BIT student group and all the interest in technology, and want to give a bunch of credit to everybody who's at the forefront of it, but especially you, Cyrus. Thanks for being such a forerunner here. And thank you, Dr. O'Connor, for having me. So, I actually started in the MA program at PAU, where I was focusing on maybe getting an MFT. I thought clinical work is my style. This sounds like something I'd like to do. While I was in the MA program, I did a full year, and it was back in 2012, 2013, and internet gaming disorder had just come out as a condition for further study in the DSM. And as someone who loved gaming and still does, I was a little bit shocked. I said, what is this in here? Is this bias? Is this something that people don't understand? And of course, that was my original inkling. But the more I looked into it and did some projects on it and researched it and looked to see what is the evidence and the data behind this, the more interest that I had that grew. And I actually had a group of professors, including Dr. Snow, who were really encouraging to me. They said, oh, you got some good ideas here. Have you ever considered a PhD? And at that time, I hadn't really, or I wasn't considering a PhD. But I took the bait and I looked into it and I thought, okay, maybe this is something I can do. So I went into the PhD program really planning to study internet gaming disorder from a sort of benefits of gaming and a little bit of a risk factors perspective. And I asked my advisors, who studies technology here? And at that time, we were still growing and still figuring it out, and no one studied gaming in earnest. And luckily enough, I got by chance into contact with Dr. Wickham, who at the time was just a statistics and research methods champion here. And so working with him, he helped me bring complex statistical models to the ideas that I had about gaming, so we could test hypotheses, come up with new theories, come up with measurements that didn't exist already. And this combination of my interest in gaming and then the skills that I learned in statistics are really what launched me into collaboration. So I got a chance to, as a stats consultant, work with so many different groups. And then you see, well, what are you doing? And what are you doing over here? And before you know it, you got so many projects and so much interest, so many ideas spinning in your head. Luckily enough, I got to keep my gaming interests, and I did stay really close to that and got to collaborate with people internationally. But through the process, I think what surprised me most was how by the end of my PhD, I was so focused on being a collaborator for statistics and research methods that I had this freedom to explore the things I wanted to explore. And then comes COVID and the pandemic and the focus on digital wellness. And suddenly, I'm launched more into this business and startup space. So that's my journey through PAU so far, with a few twists and turns, but it all sort of went the way I hoped it would, and then some.
Yeah, oh, I love that. I don't think I remembered that you started in the counseling program. I love that when faculty guide students in the right direction. So that's terrific. I'm thinking that we hadn't talked about this, but I almost feel like it'd be nice to just hear a little bit about where is the internet gaming world at this point? What have we learned, or just give us a little bit on that, since it's, I think, relevant to a lot of what people are interested in. So
Absolutely. So since it was entered in the DSM as a condition of further study, it has been substantiated with the World Health Organization. So it's recognized in the ICD as a condition. It's called gaming disorder. So they took the internet part out, so it's more broad. And treatments in other countries are really quite developed, having treatment centers and protocols and differentiation based on comorbidities and all sorts of things for gaming. And I think people are taking it more seriously as they view it as an addictive behavior. Then again, on the other side, if we just look at gaming in general, we see it's a really reinforcing activity. So some people have taken another approach to gaming, which is how can we use the parts of gaming that are a boon to keep people's attention and teach them skills, engage them in therapy, keep them coming back for things that actually enhance their lives. So research is becoming more, I think, balanced, looking at sort of the risks factors, but also resilience factors and how gaming can be positive for people's lives. So I think it's just coming more onto the scene. It's not only this platform, but this special way of interacting with the world and with other people.
I think what you're saying is so interesting, because one of the great things about being well trained in research, in addition to well trained in your clinical work, is you have to hold some ambiguities, right? And the idea that gaming can be both used as an addiction, but also can then have pro-social benefits back. I think it's very, very important that we bring that kind of depth of complexity in these issues to to what sometimes, of course, in the popular media become very, very black and white, very sort of, it's one way or another. So I appreciate that you're sort of seeing the nuances there.
I'll say, Dr. Oka, sitting at the middle, sitting at the precipice and seeing it all is very uncomfortable, right? Because wouldn't it be much easier just to say it's this or it's that? But I think being trained as a psychologist, you learn how to say, oh gosh, there are no simple answers, because there are no simple questions.
I love that. Well, hopefully I have some here so you can answer.
Well, let's see.
So you've said a little bit about this, but how, now that we're going to get into your work in the tech sector a little bit more detail, but now that you're really sort of more ensconced in that world, how do you see your psychology training having prepared you for that? I mean, apart from the gaming side of things, how do you see your training preparing you for work in the sort of business technology space?
I think we get the best of both worlds in some ways. With the research methods, you get a systematic way of thinking. So I know how to test an idea, how to hold a theory and hold another one and look at them both, like we talked about, and also how to build something to really find evidence. So it's very systematic. On the other hand, with clinical training, you get a lot of training in diplomacy, how to talk to people, how to see what people's needs are, how to really figure things out. And so having both of those, that technical and that more creative way of thinking, I think is the biggest boon for me as a clinician.
I'm looking over at our business psych faculty member over there who's like loving what you're saying right now, because I think our students in undergrad students in business psych get the benefit of that perspective. So let's dig in a little bit to the work you're doing now, which is so interesting. In addition to your fabulous teaching here for us at PAU and your clinical work at Kaiser, let's talk a little bit about your especially two different things that you're working on. The first is this amazing organization you're part of called Therapists in Tech. So it sounds like a community-based project, still growing. You're playing some leadership role in this. So tell us, how'd you become involved with it? What is the organization's goals and plans? Fill us in, because I'm pretty sure I know you're our first speaker to talk about this organization. So
great. Yes. Well, Therapists in Tech was born out of a community of people who were part of a mental health tech sort of group and things that we were talking about. And the clinicians found each other, whether they be therapists or psychologists, and said, hey, we're in mental health tech. We see there's a lot of venture capital coming in here, and we're getting asked a lot for consultation. We're getting asked a lot these questions, and how do you handle this? So it came from this idea of community support. And then one of the community members, Lord, she made a group called Therapists in Tech. And so once we had this established, it was like a core group of people. We said, okay, what are our natural inclinations and interests? And then people started joining the group. And at some point, it became natural for me to really focus in on, of course, science, but also the ethics part of Therapists in Tech. Part of what I was interested in and remain interested in is a little bit of consumer protection and thinking about our patients, and how do we help people adapt internet-based treatments with fidelity, but enough flexibility that it's meeting these innovative models and ways of delivering therapy. So Therapists in Tech right now is mostly a community group. We meet for content writer support groups. We meet for talk about DEIB initiatives. We talk about salaries. We talk about consulting. We ask how people are filling clinical roles in the digital mental health world. And we talk about funding. So it's just a way to talk clinician to clinician. How do we apply these ethics codes in this new open world? What does it mean to be HIPAA compliant? We want to make sure we're doing that. And so these questions are sort of born from the community. Right now, we're quite project-based. So if somebody has a passion project, they sort of pitch it to the group, and we say go for it. So that's resulted in a job fair with all the different jobs that are coming up. And also we did a salary survey on how much people are making in different clinical roles. And we're hoping to open up a few more initiatives about mentorship, which I know, Dr. O'Connor, is one of your big passions as well. And seeing what career trajectories look like in tech.
And tell us about yours. So I know you're focusing on sort of risk management issues, and so tell us your passion project here. You can say a little bit, but say a little bit more.
Sure. So right now, I've mostly been focusing on supporting our group in when we're making surveys to make them really good. And if you're in my stat class, you will know that's what psychometrics is. Oh my gosh, I get so excited about it. But in terms of the ethics, the serious thing that I think we can contribute as psychologists and therapists and just mental health providers broadly is an understanding of the ethical principles that isn't just, superficial. Like, we have to live it. We're constantly talking about it. We're always, especially at PAU, diving into diversity, equity, and inclusion, and really having difficult conversations, learning how to talk about these things in a way that feels safe for everybody. And I would love, as in my role in Therapists in Tech, to support other clinicians to really speak to these roles whether it be through a structure, right? Okay, here's all the ethical things that we consider. And how do you introduce that to people who are entrepreneurs? And also just with the sort of support to say, hey, there's a community behind you that absolutely says you should talk about these DEI issues, and we will support you on that as well. Another thing we're doing in Therapists in Tech is when we ask people about the roles that they're hiring for, we say, what are you doing to support diversity, equity, and inclusion in your company? How many people at their highest level are females, are people of color? So we just ask these questions, and sometimes that can be enough to provoke some insight and some reflection on it. Right now, I'm just hosting a monthly session on an article that I'm hoping to write about risk management. People always ask, I have a questionnaire, do I ask about suicide? And we can offer some advice about that.
I love that. And you're making me wonder, the APA ethics code on the psychology side of our house is under some review now. And it almost makes me wonder whether it's a bit outdated in terms of its ability to cover some of the issues that you're talking about in your group. And there may be some ways to have input into the revision of the ethics code. We may need to talk offline about that. But it's not that there's anything wrong with the ethics code. It's just that it may be not covering, it may be like a little bit of a square peg in a round hole potentially as the field evolves. We sometimes are behind the curve in terms of how to think about that. So that might be really interesting. Well, that sounds like such an important organization. I remember when I first came to PAU and talking to Eduardo or Ricardo and others that, companies were coming all the time and saying, send us your students. We need students to do this. We need that. And we didn't, there was sort of like, yeah, but what are the protections? What are you really, what do you understand about the clinical world? Like what are, and so I don't think there was that professional setting to have those conversations, other than obviously there was at PAU, but probably not many other places. So I think that's really, really powerful. And I do, as you said, I'm a little bit of a mentoring nut. So, but are there opportunities? It sounds like you're heading in this direction, but are there opportunities for therapists in training to participate in?
Yes, we have mentors at really some of the highest levels in digital mental health companies who are craving to share their experience, looking for people who are in training who might be interested in different type of roles, like what does it mean to be a chief clinical officer? What does it mean to be a user researcher? What does it mean to be fill in the blank? So to create that community would be great. And I think, Cyrus, I would say you might be making some inquiries into this as well in terms of getting more graduate students and maybe some undergraduate students too involved.
That sounds great. I think that would, we can be your guinea pigs. Well, we're talking to you at a time when we're in the middle of this big trial down in San Jose around Theranos. And really, in some ways, I've been listening to some of the commentary about the trial. And a friend of mine has actually been sitting in and providing legal commentary on it. And, in some ways, the Silicon Valley ethos is on trial in interesting ways. The sort of go fast and break things, it's okay to exaggerate. It's okay to bloviate a little bit about what you're able to do with your product, as long as you're heading in that direction. So what are, do you see any implications for that kind of ethos, that sort of the way that things have been done in Silicon Valley with respect to mental health and mental health professionals working in this space?
Oh, yeah. Talk about culture, right? The culture that we have in Silicon Valley. Like you said, move fast and break things doesn't work when you're talking about patients. We don't break things when it comes to patients, right? And so the idea of, yes, academia tends to be slower. than our business world. This is true. And maybe there's a good partnership, a good marriage between the two to use established systems that are really well known in terms of evidence base. But I have been challenged in this because I am a person who tends to caveat what I say. I'm like, well, this is true under these certain conditions that's generalizable to this population. And people are like, well, thanks, but you can drop that other part. The other one's exciting. But sometimes it's not about that. That's part of the ethical part of us being psychologists. We have to sort of model how to give information that's accurate and also in a way that can really land with people. That's part of the art and the science of it as well. And so what I hope is that as these digital mental health companies continue to blossom with the flood of funding that's coming to them, that people will learn if you can really anchor what you're doing in research that's evidence-based by having someone on your team that can help you identify that research and translate it and present it and partner with people who can tell you the evidence. Maybe that's going to help us be a little bit more mindful so we can move mindfully and do things that, you know, are going to be frontiering, right? They might not all work, but we don't do harm along the way.
I think it's such an important point. I'm thinking back to two of our earlier superstar psychologists, Megan Jones-Bell and Allison Darcy, both of whom, you know, have started these incredible companies in which they do their own randomized clinical trials, you know, and I think what you're saying, and that's definitely not the norm, you know, and so I think that this is something that we are training our students and certainly our faculty are well aware. We have to find that balance, you know, for the field, I think. So that I really, really appreciate your comments on that. Well, let's turn and talk. Speaking of Silicon Valley, you have a startup that you're working on called OpenWorld, if I'm getting that correct. I think.
Right.
So, what is OpenWorld? Tell us a little bit about it. How did it come about? Well, tell us that. Yeah, tell us a little bit about it.
Okay, sounds good. Well, Ricardo, I've noticed that you might.
Oh, his hand is up. Oh gosh, thank you, Charlotte. You're doing a better job than me at scanning.
No, that's okay.
I wanted to follow up on the issue of evidence and you know, what's ethical and so on. And a question came up at the Stanford Tech Hub just yesterday regarding FDA approval for digital interventions. And one of the people mentioned that sometimes psychologists develop these interventions, these digital interventions, but once they get FDA approval, the only one who can actually use them are psychiatrists who can prescribe them. Psychologists cannot prescribe them because we don't have prescribing privileges in most states. Which is very ironic, obviously. And I just wonder whether you have had any thoughts about this issue as to, you know, what do we do with interventions? First of all, how do we determine that they are evidence-based? You know, there are thousands of apps available now, most of which have no evidence whatsoever. Somebody just came up with an idea and put it together, and many of them probably work and many of them don't, and some of them probably cause harm. So that's one issue. How do we determine what's evidence-based? And then the other issue is, how far do we go in terms of regulation, including all the way up to FDA approval?
I think about this too. I think some of the PTSD apps that are being developed that can be helpful, but of course, once they're developed, like you said, psychiatrists are the ones who can prescribe them. I'm thinking about, I think Stephen Schuler over at UC Irvine is that One Mind Cyber Guide, starting to compile information that gives some sort of information about how much evidence base is embedded in this sort of application that people are using. And that's one project that they're doing in order to do that. But also, it's more of it's less of it's not holding people accountable the way that a regulatory body would. The question I have, and I don't have an answer for this, more of another question, which is what's the role, what's the involvement of APA? When I think about patient care and I'm meeting a patient and I think, okay, the treatment that I'm prescribing for them or that I'm going to do in our sessions together, is it approved by Division 12? If I go to the Division 12 website and look at the body of evidence to say cognitive behavioral therapy for this, is that matching what I'm doing? Can I justify this as my treatment? And that's how we typically go about it from this one-to-one therapy, understanding that the job of a therapist is lifelong in terms of keeping up with treatments and that sort of integrity piece of our ethics code. So I struggle with the thought of how much regulation we should have. I generally fall on I can be kind of strict. More is better. I want to see these things helping and protect consumers and things like that. But the question is there something that we can do that comes from our community of psychologists that might be something that the APA can also help with in terms of judging these apps as they come through. Even if it comes to if you think about entertainment software rating board, you get a video game that has some sort of grade on it, some sort of rating. Not the same, but could we come up with something creative for treatments?
Thank you.
Thank you.
I love that idea. That's fantastic. Great issue, Ricardo. Something we need to keep our eye on for sure. So speaking of now that you're joining this world of startup, how are you approaching it? Tell us about OpenWorld and how you're approaching it.
Well, it's perfect timing too, because actually, and it was Dr. Munoz in his class, internet-based interventions, where I had a project, my favorite project, there I came up with an intervention for internet gaming disorder, cognitive behavioral therapy based. And I got to create it in Qualtrics, which was cool. I had never done that before. And it really inspired me because I got to take what I learned about motivational interviewing, cognitive behavioral therapy, and internet gaming and self-determination theory and create this really dynamic sort of treatment. And I felt more innovative than I thought I would feel. Like I thought I was going to be so, scientific doing my papers and everything, but to flex that creativity muscle was really nice. And so that became the basis for some of the treatments I've been thinking about developing for internet gaming disorder. And with sort of this unique expertise that I was able to develop in my training in PAU and a little bit of addictions research and a little bit of international research and looking across the spectrum of treatment, I decided to launch an organization. It's called OpenWorld, and OpenWorld is a gaming term for a place inside a gaming world where you can just choose your own adventure. You don't have to follow a set path. You get to choose what you do. And so OpenWorld is really focused on digital wellness, having people have balance in their lives. I also like to work with gamers. I find quite creative and fun people. So is there adventure therapy we can do? Are there other ways we can approach therapy that keep all the great creative things, the self-esteem affirming events that happen in internet gaming, but also view this as a very serious thing that sometimes can be an addictive behavior. So the first part of that model is direct to consumer, but also the loftier goal is to work with industry, maybe gaming companies, to say, is there something we can do to help you with your social responsibility? How can we embed things in games that help people, just like they do in Vegas with the slot machines? You get a number on the top. If you have a problem, call this number. I think we got to do something similar for our gamers as well. So that's all, both in process and launching, and it's a wonderful foray for me to look at business and science and entrepreneurship.
I mean, it's so ambitious, and it's so wonderful to see it come out of your work originally in Dr. Munoz's class, and then evolved in the way it has. There's a question in the chat which I will get to in a minute, but I wanted to understand. So, one of the things that I think we've been taught, we had a discussion the other day with Esther Wojcicki about a startup she's doing, and she's the founder, and and was looking for creators. And so, do you think, you're a founder, but you're also an academic investigator, you're a content creator, how do you see yourself in your role with OpenWorld?
Oh, I guess, all of the above. That's the problem. I can't choose, right? That's the place we get with a curious mind. And I know so many people here agree, where you find yourself wearing all these different hats. I think at the end of the day, I would just love to be as efficient as possible in terms of making a difference in my community. And in my community, in this way, I mean the community of clinicians who focus on gaming disorder and digital interventions. So part of that I'm seeing in the longer term is just like my role in therapists in tech, helping other clinicians to come up and use these treatments as they go. But being a founder is that world of pitching to VCs and coming up with your big financial plan, which has a lot of ifs and thens. It's a quite a different process, but wow, what a wonderful way to flex new muscles in my brain, I think. And so, to be frank, Dr. Okai, I imagine I'm going to be doing a little bit of all, always, just as I go forward.
I can see that too. Well, it's a great segue into a question Javier has about the job outlook in the gaming area for mental health counselors. And are you seeing virtual reality, being woven into counseling in this area? Are there practicum or internships specifically in gaming that you know about? So what's it look like on the clinical side of the house here?
I'll say one of the challenges in the US is that it's not officially recognized yet, internet gaming disorder, with the DSM. So I don't think there are any dedicated positions right now. Of course, I would love to build some of those eventually with OpenWorld and some of the other places that do these types of treatments. But most of the time, we're focused on different populations right now in terms of behavioral addiction. But there are certainly these crossover things that people can do if they're interested in treating gaming. So looking at gambling disorder, looking at treating addictions in a more conventional sense, as we know them, substance use addictions. A lot of my training came from the Center for Neurobehavioral Research on Addiction in Houston, where I looked at people with cocaine use disorder. Very interesting to take from these different populations. So taking these more sort of standard and well-known approaches to mental health treatment, I feel like is a foundation. Like it's important to get that opportunity. Once you have that opportunity, you may find people who are innovating in the same space you're interested in, and you may find wonderful mentors who take you to those areas as well and open up your mind, or you might, create it yourself. But I think before we get more into the treatment of gaming disorder, if I were to advise somebody who's interested in technology right now, I would say going with what you know best about the evidence base, getting really solid on that training, then maybe going with a digital mental health company who's using innovative ways to show these things, or going the addiction route if you really want to work with people who might have gaming disorder. But you never know what path to take in order to get you to the place you want to go. So staying open.
I love that. I mean, just today we were in a meeting about, we are working on certificate in addiction training here at PAU, and this conversation has made me realize I need to ask a question in those discussions, which is, should we be addressing this issue in that certificate? We might be ahead of the curve, but perhaps we should have you record one of the sessions for that certificate. So I'm great question, Javier. Thank you so much for that. So I want to ask you a little bit more, because what I've enjoyed talking to you about so much is how you did not expect to become a stats and research methods nerd in your time at PAU. But, talk a little bit about the opportunities that are available for mental health professionals who have strengths in their clinical, in their clinical work, but also on the research side? I mean, obviously some of them you've mentioned already but sort of how have you seen that play out in your opportunities that have come to you?
I would say two things that opened my world up most were understanding stats and research methods and getting a clinical license. I think those two things, as soon as they were the landmarks with getting me into these next opportunities, getting me more involved into things, to really focus on the stat and research methods. Once you have the foundation and the skill and the scaffold to answer scientific questions, and you've developed the curious scientific mind, suddenly everything becomes a research question. So danger, if anyone's interested in that, suddenly you see the world differently and people will come to you asking you, well, how do I answer this question? And for me, wow, did it open up my world. It's fascinating to understand that there is a framework that human beings have built to try to get as close to the truth as possible. I find that to be such a wonderful human trait that we've done, and the checks and balances that are embedded in there, from a philosophy standpoint even, are fascinating too. Can we really say truth? No, I can only state this with 95% confidence. Wow, like what a wonderful way of approaching things. And so the study of statistics and research methods itself, I think, is interesting and can take your career anywhere you want. You can be a co-investigator who always goes alongside a primary investigator and maybe does their stats or comes up with new models. You can go into the business world and you can look at complex data structures. Of course, we know that big tech has big data, and you can not only get a chance to find patterns in these data, but you can also, from an AI and ethics standpoint, say, yes, this is statistically significant, but is it meaningful? And for who? And now what? And so you get to really be on the precipice of answering those questions once you understand the numbers. Now, if you're more of a theoretical thinker or you're not into stat, and that was what I thought about myself incorrectly, so maybe you just have these burning questions, and stat's going to give you the tools to answer your burning questions. It opens your world up because you can. Of course, a caution, do have collaborators, because it's nice when you know your blind spots. And especially as someone who's learning, it's nice when someone can say, but have you heard of this theory? It will take you into a different direction, but it's just a wonderful way of being. Now, if people are more interested in stat, they can do user research as well. Like you go into companies and you test products and you come in with your neutral stance and you get data that's qualitative. That's very interesting as well. So I think the role of psychologists, specifically when it comes to social and behavioral science research, is just going to grow the same way that we see the role of clinicians with clinical licenses growing.
Check boxes.
Yes.
So you've now been out for a few years. You're still, I would say, early career. You're probably maybe our most early career speaker in this series so far. But even in your time, how have you seen the role of psychology and psychologists change in the high tech sector? And what do we need to be worrying about? You had mentioned to me at one point the idea of a chief clinical officer. Tell us sort of where you see the tech world right now.
I think it's important for us to become allies with our entrepreneurs, our tech companies, big tech, all of them, because we can offer so much. I've met with people who are in companies and they say, I just want to treat panic disorder. If only there was a way. Oh, wait a second. I'm your person. You want to, yeah, there's a way. There's a way. Tell me what you're thinking. Or you find people reinventing treatments for depression. And we know there's great treatments for depression. And so what a chief clinical officer can do, what a behavioral health consultant can do, is they can say, this is what you're interested in, this is what you want to treat. Let me tell you what the evidence already says. And this is how we approach it. And you bring in the framework of how we treat. And this is a wonderful, wonderful thing to bring to a team. You are going to save them so much time, so much effort. You tell people things and they're fascinated. And so a chief clinical officer isn't only about collecting data and doing the data analysis about how effective a treatment is. It's developing from the content. You think of some of these fantastic apps that have integrated CBT, like Noom, for example, that weight loss app, the CBT they've got in there, they don't hide it. And it's wonderful to see that. So I think the role of the psychologist, what we can help most with is the structures, introducing what we already know and pairing with our friends in tech to bring it to a larger amount of people, increase access.
I love that. And my field is law and psychology, and I often had that exact sense that lawyers and judges are over here like trying to make things up and figure things out. I was like, there's actually research that could answer that question for you. Let me get it for you so you can
exactly. Here you go. Right, and you're happy to. Yeah,
exactly. So I want to get back to one thing you mentioned with respect to your therapists in tech. And we had a equity and inclusion town hall today at PAU. Obviously our students are very focused on promoting mental health equity and thinking about access to care and things. So how does the work that you do, maybe say a little bit more about that work to advance concerns about disparities in access to mental health care? Do you have any sort of insights or advice for us about how we could help advance that wonderful cause?
From a therapist in tech perspective, within our organization from day one, this has been always on our agenda, always checking each other, and including people who are really are important members who might not have had a voice in the past. So really amplifying marginalized voices. That is one of the biggest things that we want to focus on, but also asking the question to entrepreneurs and asking the question to big tech, which is, what are you doing here? Not, are you doing anything? What are you doing? So to know that we as a group of people who have power and privilege in this community, because oftentimes people have advanced degrees and advanced positions and roles within these tech companies. We're saying, what are we doing? What are you doing? And how well are we doing? So we're auditing ourselves all the time. And that comes to practice too. And I think PAU is a really good practice ground for having these conversations about diversity, equity, and inclusion. So it's just about not making it an ancillary question, but an absolute part that's embedded in the mission. So in our mission statement for therapists in tech, we talk about amplifying marginalized voices because it just simply makes things better. I think we get better ideas with more heterogeneity in our groups, of course, and we also have a responsibility to do that as people who hold a privilege. Now, and this I learned from Dr. Munoz, of course. The power of technology is that when we deliver a treatment, it's not just an hour of our time that's consumed for one person. An hour of our time can touch the lives of thousands of people if it's a digital mental health app, because there's the automated part of it can increase access to more people who might not have gotten it before. And that is so exciting. That's so exciting, that part of our field, because it does create more of an equal playing field. Think about the prices for private practice in the region we're living in. Usually it costs about $225 an hour to see a therapist in private practice. And you might get fabulous therapy. And that is a very privileged thing that you'd be able to do if you could afford it. So if we can use that to offer more services to more people and reduce the suffering, I think it's our privilege and our responsibility to do so.
That's great. Well, I can't end without asking you about training. And so that's what we're So we did call this series Superstar Psychologists in Technology. I can't remember if that was Cyrus or Ricardo or Barr or somebody came up with that wonderful title. But I think what we're really trying to do by having these conversations is obviously learn about the space, expose our students and faculty what's going on in this amazing time in technology and mental health. But also, how can we at PAU support the best research and clinical training experiences to ensure that we continue to produce people like yourself, who see things in this way. I mean, I think we are so fortunate to have so many amazing faculty doing work in this area. But we need to help our field. We need to help our field see the importance of the training that we're trying to provide. So how would you think about the training experience that you had that you might reshape in certain ways, or what advice can we take from you about how to best offer these opportunities to our students?
It's, I get a little stuck on this one, Dr. Khanna, because Palo Alto University, I think I've said this before, it's what they call a choose your own adventure. So there's so many faculty, there's so many opportunities, and you're never siloed. I never once felt siloed into, I have to do CBT for anxiety. I never did, right? And my options were so open. And of course, we know, wow, that's can be intimidating at times. And I think learning that people have this spark of interest. And then what happened for me is it was just fostered through people going, yeah, I agree, that's interesting. So maybe keeping that creative mindset and that open mindset is one of the most important things for training. If my mentors, my professors, my advisors approach me with curiosity, and I go, well, what do I know? I'm supposed to be approaching you with curiosity. And it was it happened both ways. And it's very encouraging. And it also makes you feel empowered when people do that. And I think it's genuine. So if we maintain our genuine curiosity as psychologists, I think that's one way to do it. The other way is sometimes we can get stuck in a mindset of this traditional way of doing it. I know it works, so it must be good. And that's true. And can we amplify it? Can we change it? Can we be flexible? And so reminding our colleagues to be flexible as well in the ways that we view things, give it a try, see what you think. And if you still don't like it, that's okay too. So taking a flexible approach to pairing with industry and pairing with tech companies as well. And the other thing, I know there might be a digital mental health certificate that's coming through. And I wholeheartedly support that. I think we need more of that. And I invite anybody who's interested in technology, who's interested in becoming a therapist in the tech space, becoming a psychologist in the tech space, whatever it is, to join Therapists in Tech. You just go to Therapists in Tech and there's a join link. And it's part of a Slack community. That's one of our things. We want to make sure everyone knows Slack. This is one of the tech things they use all the time. So you have to join us on Slack and be part of the conversation, because there are so many different voices and different perspectives. So I'm excited to see what you all come up with and what your students come up with and what our students come up with, I should say, in these coming years. I'm sure it's beyond my imagination.
I love it. And one of the questions in the chat is, you may have just answered, but if they go to the Therapists in Tech site, would there also be a way to learn about mentorships or becoming a mentee?
Yes, I think there's a graduate student channel. I am not a part of it, so it's just for the graduate students. It's led by a graduate student as well. And I think Cyrus might have been following up on that and have some more information for anybody who's interested. First, you join the Slack channel, and then you get into that sub channel and join the conversations there. And we're hoping to do some more pairing up of mentors and mentees soon.
Well, and something to think about, because it's a new organization. A lot of organizations that we've been part of in our field end up having campus-based clubs. So maybe BITS could be sort of a formal, connection to to the organization somehow, or we could be a campus chapter or something. I don't know.
I like it.
Think about
Yeah.
different ideas. Professor Bunge is reminding us in the chat too, besides the certificate in digital mental health, that we also now have an e-clinic where we are training, students are receiving training and supervision in teletherapy and use of digital interventions. And I think that's allowing us, this is where we have to help the field
Yes.
keep up with us because the field, we're concerned that we are sort of on, special pandemic approval to use digital supervision, for example, in our clinical work, and so we have to be advocates on our own behalf to keep that going. Well, this has been such a great conversation. I see we're close to the end here. I want to perhaps open it up to others who might have had questions, didn't want to put them in the chat. Feel free to to chime in or to just have comments or questions. Any final thoughts you have, Charlotte? We'll take a few minutes to just have a conversation.
Hello, I have a question. Other question.
Yes, go ahead, Javier.
Thank you. Does any possibility in the future for virtual reality for therapies? And the second question regarding is there any application or game for like EMDR for PTSD or depression? Thank you.
Yes. In terms of the internet-based intervention, the virtual reality-based interventions, I think this is certainly a frontiering edge. And PTSD treatment has been one of those that they've started to look at this in. Now, I don't know off the cuff all of the research and the different applications you could use for that, but I think you're thinking exactly the right direction. This is something they have been using for, you think about exposure-based therapies as well. I'm sure that some of our BITS people do know a little bit more about this, but yeah, I think it's a place that they're frontiering. Mm-hmm.
It's such a good question, though, because as you sort of suggest, I imagine the technology is ahead of the research. And we need to perhaps help, I'm seeing some people who need dissertations and, and research projects. There may be some important work on some of these newer interventions that we need to focus on. So that's a great way to think, Javier, because it gets you thinking ahead of the literature, I know that our wonderful new provost, Dr. Cameron, I think she's here, she was able to participate in a virtual reality group therapy, metaverse type situation, and was very came away quite impressed with it, and so we're sort of definitely we have it on our radar for sure. That's great. Other comments, questions? We have about 2 minutes left here, 3 minutes.
I have a quick question, if that's all right.
Yeah, go.
I have been kind of like what you said, Dr. Beard, about like looking at different, I'm sorry, my cat is very annoying. Been looking at different job applications or job postings in the digital mental health field and kind of looking at what they're looking for. And I feel like as therapists, therapists in training, we have a lot of the core like soft skills. But some of the like UX design, things like that, those are just things that we don't get right now, specifically like in the PsyD program, which I'm in. I've been looking at some courses online that are very expensive, but it seems like it would be relevant and give me the skills I need. What do you think about that? Do you think it's worth the money, or is there a different avenue you would suggest?
This is a brilliant question, because I see this a lot. Like you have people who have like a master's in experimental psychology, for example, and that might have been more of a traditional path to go into like user research or something like that. I think if you strengthen research methods and statistics and then talk to people who are already doing the position and believe it or not, the networking, I think, is one of the most powerful things you can do. I remember when I was a student, I wasn't into networking as much. Maybe it was I was shy or something like that, but I couldn't believe how powerful it was. So maybe, like Eduardo was saying, take some of the digital certificate for PAU students and look into it a little bit more. I think the skills that they're really looking for in those types of positions are that analytical thinking and that ability to really understand the research and handle data sets. So if that's something that you can feel you can do and you're confident about, learning more statistical programs like R and SPSS with the knowledge that you're already getting from your PsyD might be another way to do it. But I recommend come join our Therapists in Tech community, see if if there are any UX researchers on there, and maybe pick their brain a little bit about what they think.
We did have a UserX psychologist at for one of these amazing events. So that is also on YouTube if you haven't seen it. Because I do think Dr. Bungay has been thinking about whether, how to offer a course in that area in our master's program, but that would be available to our doctoral students as well. So I think you're onto something. I think we need to, it is really strong research methods and stats that really underlies much of that work. And I think we should really, we should be able to offer that. So I think, push us on that. That's good. That's a good direction for us. Sam Jaffe, thank you, Eduardo. I could not remember the name off the top of my head. He was the one who presented, so check that out on our PAU's YouTube channel. I'm not sure I've ever said that phrase before, but there you go. All right, I think we're going to wrap it up, Cyrus, yes?
Yeah, again, thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Beard, and thank you again, Dr. O'Connor, for always being here to help us moderate.
I couldn't do nothing I enjoy more. This is wonderful. Thank you so much, Charlotte.
Oh, it's an honor, a pleasure. Thank you, everybody. If anyone has any other questions, you guys can find my information, cbeard@paloaltou.edu. Easy enough. Send me a message. Always happy to connect. Thanks, everybody.